Look at how people can turn absolutely anything into a conspiracy theory whenever there is a political figure they already decided to hate. And I want to start this video precisely by dismantling this idea that the entire UFO file disclosure story is supposedly some kind of evil manipulation created by Trump to control the population. Because honestly, that logic simply does not hold up. And it does not hold up for one very simple reason. If the goal was to create a massive psychological manipulation using aliens, cosmic threats, and that kind of narrative, this would have been done a long time ago, much earlier. Because the United States has had material involving unidentified aerial phenomena for decades. This did not begin now. This was not born under Trump. This went through Democrat governments, Republican governments, military administrations, civilian administrations, conservatives, and progressives. So trying to place all of this exclusively on Trump is far more ideological obsession than rational analysis. And there's another point. People talk as if Trump created some giant global manipulation machine, while forgetting that for years, it was the American establishment itself that ridiculed this subject. They buried it, they silenced witnesses, they turned anyone discussing UFOs into a joke. So the logical question would be, why would Trump specifically have an interest in opening files that other governments kept hidden? Because this can also be interpreted another way. Maybe it is simply transparency. Maybe it is simply the release of information. Maybe it is just a government allowing public access to previously classified documents. And honestly, that makes far more sense than imagining a giant cosmic conspiracy created to dominate humanity. Now, another important thing. The original script tries to use the complicated geopolitical moment of the United States as proof that there is manipulation happening. But that also makes no sense. Because the world always lives through tension. There is always war. There is always economic crisis. There are always international disputes. So any revelation made during any period could be forced into a conspiracy narrative. If it happened during Biden's administration, people would say Democrats want control. If it happened under Trump, they say Republicans want manipulation. In other words, the conclusion was already decided before the facts even appeared. And that is a huge problem. Because when someone decides beforehand that everything is conspiracy, they lose the ability to analyze things rationally. Now let's say something that very few people have the courage to say. Does life outside Earth exist? Probably yes. The universe is gigantic. That is not madness. That is not fanaticism. That is statistics. Modern science itself has shown us a universe far larger than we once imagined. So the possibility of other forms of life should not terrify anyone anymore. And perhaps that is exactly why governments are beginning to treat the subject less like a joke. Not because they are preparing a fake invasion, but because hiding everything forever may no longer make sense. Now notice another contradiction in the conspiracy narrative. At the same time, people accuse Trump of manipulating the public. They also say the files are probably real. So what exactly is the logic? If real unexplained phenomena exist, eventually they would need to be discussed publicly. And any president who allowed that would automatically be accused of running a secret agenda. So there is no winning. If they hide it, people scream cover-up. If they release it, people scream manipulation. So maybe the problem is not the files. Maybe the problem is society's obsession with turning absolutely everything into political warfare. And honestly, that has become a modern disease. Everything now needs to become ideological conflict, even the possibility of extraterrestrial life. And that destroys any serious debate, because the UFO subject should be treated through scientific investigation, data analysis, and technical observation, not through political fanaticism, neither pro-Trump nor anti-Trump. But unfortunately, many people would rather turn every subject into a battlefield. And then real discussion dies. Now let's talk about this automatic attempt to associate military involvement with global conspiracy, because that was also used in an extremely exaggerated way. First, what institution would naturally investigate unidentified aerial phenomena? NASA? Partially, yes. But also the military. Because any unknown object entering national airspace automatically becomes a defense matter. That happens in every country on Earth. If tomorrow an unidentified object appeared flying over Brazil, who would investigate first? Astronomers? No. The Air Force, military radar, air defense, that is completely normal. So trying to transform military participation into proof of a hidden agenda makes very little sense. And another thing, the original script suggests that the United States is preparing a new war using aliens as a fake enemy. But honestly, that sounds more like a Hollywood screenplay than real geopolitics, because governments do not need to invent aliens in order to justify military budgets. They never did. There have always been enough real conflicts. China, Russia, Iran, terrorism. technological competition. So, the idea that they need a cosmic enemy feels far more like conspiracy fantasy than concrete analysis. Now, another interesting point. Trump himself never built his political image around alien narratives. Never. He did not win elections talking about UFOs. He did not build a political movement around extraterrestrials. So it makes no sense to suddenly imagine that his entire global strategy now depends on UFO disclosure. On the contrary, Trump has always focused on economic nationalism, borders, industry, trade disputes, and immigration. That has always been the center of his political identity. So trying to force a massive extraterrestrial agenda into Trumpism feels artificial. And that brings us to another point, the criticism that the disclosure is too American. But who else would realistically possess the largest amount of military UFO data? The United States has the largest military structure on Earth, the greatest technological capability, the most advanced aerial monitoring, the largest satellite network, the biggest budget. So naturally, much of this material would come from them. That does not prove manipulation. That simply proves operational capacity. Now, of course, does that mean we should blindly believe everything? No, never. Discernment matters. But discernment also means not automatically falling into paranoia, because today there is a collective addiction to believing everything is a secret agenda. Everything. And honestly, sometimes reality is much simpler. Maybe they are simply opening old files because public pressure increased. The internet changed the flow of information. The ridicule surrounding the subject decreased. Military pilots started speaking more openly. That alone would already explain a lot without needing to invent a cosmic war. And let's say another truth here. There is also a massive conspiracy market. A lot of people make money feeding fear. A lot of people survive selling hidden secrets. So the more terrifying the narrative becomes, the more engagement it creates, more views, more sharing, more monetization. And that also needs to be said, because today fear became a product and paranoia became entertainment. Another thing I find extremely exaggerated is the attempt to connect astrology with a global military agenda. And I know many people will disagree, but let's speak rationally. One thing is using astrology symbolically, spiritually, or interpretively. Something completely different is believing governments are coordinating alien disclosures based on Uranus entering Gemini. That already enters an extremely speculative territory. And the problem with this kind of interpretation is that it always finds patterns after events happen. Always. You can fit almost any major event into some astrological transit. War, crisis, pandemic, disclosure, collapse, everything. So people need to be very careful not to transform symbolic interpretation into proof of hidden agendas, because at that point they stop analyzing concrete reality and begin seeing secret coordination in absolutely everything. Now, another important thing. The original script attempts to portray Trump as a desperate manipulator trying to save his popularity, but that completely ignores the American political context. Trump remains one of the most influential political figures on earth, loved by some, hated by others, but undeniably relevant. So this narrative of a failed president resorting to aliens feels far more like political bias than objective reality. And another thing, if unexplained aerial phenomena truly exist in official records, hiding them forever would be even worse, much worse, because then distrust would only grow forever. So partially opening information may actually be an attempt to reduce speculation, not increase it. Now let's think calmly. What exactly would be the practical benefit of inventing a fake alien threat? Global control. Governments already possess enormous control through economics, technology, media, and legislation. They do not need aliens. Military funding. The United States already has an enormous military budget. They do not need fake extraterrestrials. So once you begin dismantling these theories rationally, much of the narrative collapses. And honestly, perhaps there is also a collective psychological issue happening. People became so distrustful of institutions that now absolutely everything automatically becomes conspiracy. Everything. And that is dangerous because eventually nobody believes anything anymore. Not facts. Not documents, not evidence. Everything becomes manipulation. And then society enters an era where objective reality itself disappears. Now let's talk about perhaps the biggest contradiction of all, the idea that nobody outside the United States cares about this. That is simply not true. The UFO topic has existed worldwide for decades. Brazil, France, Russia, Chile, Japan, Mexico. There are military documents in many countries. There are pilots reporting strange phenomena. There are declassified archives in multiple governments. So transforming this into an exclusively American obsession does not match reality. What actually happens is that the United States naturally receives more global attention because it dominates international media. Everything happening there becomes gigantic. Now, another thing, the original script practically suggests that any charismatic figure introduced globally could become some sort of alien savior. But honestly, that seems extremely unlikely. Modern society is deeply fragmented. People can barely agree on politics. Imagine expecting humanity to unite around an extraterrestrial religion, so this vision of humanity instantly kneeling before an alien narrative feels highly exaggerated. And another thing, the current level of public distrust would prevent that anyway. Today, people question everything. So if tomorrow some extraordinary announcement appeared, half the world would believe it while the other half would call it CGI. That is modern reality. There is no longer any absolute narrative control. So these theories about total manipulation also ignore how the internet completely shattered centralized information. Now let me say something that may upset many people. Part of the UFO community itself became almost religious. And that is dangerous, because then people stop analyzing. They simply believe. Every video becomes proof. Every light in the sky becomes a spaceship. Every narrative becomes unquestionable truth. And that destroys the credibility of the topic itself. So when someone asks for more rationality, that does not mean denying extraterrestrial life. It simply means separating hypothesis, evidence, speculation, propaganda. And honestly, Trump may actually be doing something more rational than previous administrations. Releasing partial information, allowing public debate, reducing the taboo, without necessarily claiming aliens have arrived. Because until now, there has been no official announcement saying extraterrestrials are here. What exists are files involving unexplained phenomena, and that is very different. Very different. Unexplained phenomena do not automatically mean alien spacecraft. It could be unknown technology, error, atmospheric phenomena, or genuinely extraordinary events. But nobody truly knows yet. And precisely for that reason, the debate should be more scientific and less paranoid. Another thing that stands out to me is how some people seem disappointed because disclosure did not happen in the fantastical way they imagined. They wanted spaceships landing. They wanted aliens on live television. They wanted spectacle. But governments do not work that way. Everything happens gradually, especially sensitive subjects. So even if real files exist, of course any opening would happen slowly, carefully, partially. And that does not prove conspiracy. It simply proves institutional caution. And honestly, I think it is far healthier to maintain a balanced position, neither blind belief nor absolute paranoia, because both extremes lead to the same problem, loss of discernment. And that is exactly what society lacks today. People forgot how to observe reality without fanaticism. Everything became tribalism, even UFOs. At the end of the day, what I see in this entire story is something far simpler than these gigantic theories. I see a government releasing old files, a society deeply distrustful, a topic that was ridiculed for decades finally being discussed officially, and many people trying to weaponize it ideologically. And honestly, perhaps the greatest lesson here is learning balance, not becoming blind devotees of official narratives, but also not sinking into total paranoia. Because one thing remains true, the universe is still gigantic. The possibility of life beyond Earth still exists. And humanity probably still knows very little about what exists out there. But that does not automatically mean global conspiracy. It does not mean governments are preparing a cosmic war. And it also does not mean every released document is fake. Maybe this is simply the beginning of a gradual opening of information. And maybe years from now, humanity will look back and realize we transformed what could have been a scientific discussion into yet another ideological war. Now tell me this, do you believe this UFO file disclosure is genuine transparency or political manipulation? And another question, do you want me to make a spiritual prediction about what may emerge from these revelations over the next few years? Comment below what you want to see in the next video.